how to get started. Hopefully everyone had a great lunch and you're not too sleepy from the food that you had, and hopefully the excitement of all the awards kept you engaged and excited to be here. I'm Chris Kahn. I'm hosting the session for Colleen Welsh-Allen. Thank you for being here. The topic, as you can see, is the hidden forces that shape our decisions. And just a little bit of housekeeping. I don't know, are you going to take questions during, or do you want to wait till the end? Because
good question. I don't know. No, if you want to ask a question, you want to. That's fine.
So if you're going to ask a question then during the presentation, make sure that you raise your hand. I'll be watching, and I want to make sure we get a microphone in front of you so everyone can hear, because I've had a number of the sessions that I've been at where I couldn't hear, and I know that's frustrating. So if you want to ask a question, just flag me down, and I've got a couple microphones here. Also, I'm supposed to remind you that you'll be getting a review after this session, and you'll be getting it by email, and it's in the app, and so you can go ahead and evaluate the session. But I think that's it. So let me introduce to you Colleen. I want to make sure I get all her credentials right. And the one thing I will tell you before I read all this is that, we all come from different backgrounds. Some of us come from advertising, marketing, psychology, anthropology. But I think Colleen has probably got one of the most unique backgrounds because she's a nurse. So she's bringing a unique perspective to us today. Colleen Welsh-Allen is a registered nurse, and she's Vice President of Qualitative Research. Colleen has over 25 years of experience in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries. Her clinical experience includes, I'm going to skip over the first word. I probably should have gotten
Although you're going to hear stories about it.
I know. Coronary care, infectious disease, and critical care medicine. More than 15 years ago, Colleen decided to translate her experience as a nurse into a career in medical marketing research. Colleen's qualitative research has encompassed many treatment areas and research techniques, and she's interviewed many segments of the therapeutic areas. Again, I don't know some of these abbreviations, but she's interviewed nurses, patients, doctors, and physician's assistants. She's a member of the QRCA, and she's co-director of the Pharmaceutical and Healthcare, is that a SIG or a committee? SIG. As vice president at her company, Colleen oversees all the qualitative and the moderators and is responsible for quality control on all the projects that she works with. And I'm sure she has some great things to share for us. Thank you, Colleen, for being here.
So a lot of my examples are going to be medical. I did try and drop in other examples, but that's my life. It's sort of been my life since I was 18. But I want to start off with everybody in the room is a moderator. And we all, that great interview, you ever get to the end of an interview and, oh man, it went so deep. You got those nuggets. You're on a high, and your client's on a high. Does everyone know that feeling? Yeah. Well, that, I think, is what drives us, those wonderful interviews when we can get really deep and we can get such meaning and truth from our respondents. And that's why I love behavioral economics. So I heard about behavioral economics several years ago, and believe it or not, here at the QRCA. And I was listening to it, and it just struck me so hard because I am in medical marketing research. And pharmaceutical is notoriously behind the times. I mean, projective exercises that you probably have done for 10 years is new to us, and trying to sell a client on innovation is really difficult. And I saw this behavioral economics and I thought, oh my God, I've got to bring that into research. Because I can tell you, medicine is not rational. I'm a nurse. Pull me aside tonight, give me a drink, I'll tell you stories that'll make your hair stand on end. Medicine is not rational. Doctors are not rational, and yet in pharmaceuticals, our research was so rational. And so I started reading, and I started taking classes, and I started learning the principles, and I do not claim to be an expert in behavioral economics, but along the way I've brought these principles into research, and I find I'm getting deeper truths. I'm able to probe better. I'm more often getting those nuggets that just give you that high and make you want to moderate more. And I hope I can give you some ideas for some nuggets too. So behavioral economics has been around since the late 70s. Truth of the matter is two Nobel Prize winners in behavioral economics. Daniel Kahneman, 1978, prospect theory. He was an economist, but also psychologist. And just 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years, Richard Thaler in Chicago, for you Chicagoans, also won a Nobel Prize for his research in decision making. This is not a fad. This is not going away. It just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and the research keeps getting better and better and better. And I really love that so many of the talks so far in the last couple of days, they all kind of tie together, because I'm going to talk a lot about the primitive brain. And if you were at the storytelling, she talked about the primitive brain, and the keynote speaker yesterday talked about the primitive brain. And we're just learning more and more and more about how we operate in that primitive brain. So it's basically, there's three prevalent themes in behavioral economics. The first is that we're not rational. We don't make decisions rationally. I hate hearing that. It makes me, when I first started learning about behavioral economics, I kind of went back and judged myself on everything. Like, why did I decide on that car? You know, it drove me crazy for a while until I just gave up. And, you know, heuristics. We make 95% of our decisions using mental shortcuts, rules of thumb, that primitive brain. And then framing. And I'm going to get a lot more into framing as we go along. I've got examples on every slide. Don't necessarily read them. I'm going to give you other examples as I go along and talk. And you can download this deck so that you'll have that anyway. So, you know, listen to my examples versus read. So, disclaimer, this slide comes up in every one of my talks about behavioral economics. And the reason that it does is by about this point, my voice is still shaking, and I need a laugh. So please laugh. So I bring this slide up to get a laugh. But humans are thinking as cats are to swimming. We can do it when we have to, but we much prefer not to. Everything we've been hearing the last 2 days, we don't like to think, right? And we like to live in that primitive brain, and that's what, you know, behavioral economics is all about. I also will mention that a lot of people are now calling it behavioral science, because what happened was it started with economists, but then along the way, psychologists got into the act, and neuroscientists got into the act. And so a lot of clients, at least my clients, prefer to call it behavioral science versus economics, because it spreads beyond just economics, really. It's every decision we make, not necessarily economic decisions. So you might hear it said that way, and if your clients do refer to it, then that's what they're talking about. It's the same thing. But basically, the idea is that our cognitive system is divided into two parts. We've got system one, which is fast, gut, subconscious, uncontrolled, effortless. That's where we're spending 95% of our time. And then system two, which is slow, rational, we really think about it, it's deliberate. I always give an example to people when they're first getting into behavioral economics, that system two is where you start doing things. Imagine when you learned how to drive a car or ride a bike. You were completely in system two. You were doing things very slowly, methodically. Now, here you are today. If you went to the grocery store, can you tell me how you drove there? Everything eventually moves into system one. And let me tell you, it happens with surgeons too. So, oh, that's a vote. Okay. So when I first started talking about this with clients, they were like, no, doctors, surgeons, they are so system one. You know, they're rational. They did a study in Canada. It was a cognitive reflection test with fourth-year medical students. And what they found, now this is medical school. These guys weren't in their internship yet. They weren't in their residency. What they found were 50% of the students were already making diagnostic decisions in System 1. 50%. Can you imagine what you're doing 10 years out? You know, your surgeons and these doctors who are taking care of you? So anybody who tells you that medicine is rational doesn't know their stuff. But that's just about everything. I mean, we're all operating in System 1, and there's a good reason why we do that, by the way. The primitive brain is a protective mechanism. Could you imagine if you had to think through every single decision? Should I hold my hands like this? Should I take a step forward? Should I look here or there? We would drown in our thinking process. We really would. This is a primitive, but it's also a protective mechanism. But the reason that we have to know about heuristics are for a couple of reasons. One, because our respondents operate in System 1, but also that bad heuristics can get in there. When I was a nurse, I was an administrator of 3 units, and I'm sure the student nurses hated my guts. Because when they would come on the floor and they would be taught something, and I didn't even realize I was operating in behavioral economics, and say they were learning how to give a shot. I made them go through every process, slowly, surely, meticulously. And I would get, some of the other nurses on the floor would be like, well, why are you doing that? They could do this way, or that way, or this way, or that way. And I always used to say, if I don't start them here, then I don't know where they're going to end up, because they're all going to figure out shortcuts, right? Everyone's going to figure out a shortcut. If I let them start with shortcuts, God help us in 6 months. So I was very strict how I kind of trained the nurses that worked for me. And I guess without even realizing it, I understood that we're all going to develop shortcuts. So heuristics, why are they important in market research? They're mental shortcuts, they're rules of thumb. We have to understand them. They're what's driving behavior. And isn't that what we, as market researchers, need to understand? We need to understand behavior to help our clients change behavior. So we have to understand heuristics. So when this first all started coming about, there were 2 big heuristics that kind of came out. We're going to go into quite a few of them. But the 2 big ones that sort of started out everything was the availability and the representative. So the availability heuristic basically says that we make decisions based on recent memories. And the more emotionally charged a memory is, the more likely it is to impact our decisions and our behavior. So, example, plane crash tomorrow, knock on wood. Everyone knock on wood. But anyway, a very high percentage of people are going to suddenly start driving. People are going to not use their plane tickets. Is this rational? No. The truth of the matter is you're more likely to die in a car than you are in a plane, but that availability heuristic drives you, and that's a very emotionally charged memory. But the same thing can happen in research. So they did a study on depression, and what they found was people that had better recall of antidepressant ads usually reported a higher incidence of depression than people with a lower recall. Now, this can pretty much work for anything. A truck, probably people who have higher recalls of trucks would indicate that there were more trucks on the road, because that's their availability heuristic. So why is it important to us as researchers? Well, I think we need to understand the recent influences on the people that we interview. For instance, if I'm interviewing a doctor about a hypertensive medication, and the day before I interview him, he has a patient who comes in and reports a side effect, a nasty side effect, so emotionally charged. Now, the next day I'm asking him about this antihypertensive, and he basically says to me, oh, I never prescribed that. Well, that might not be true. That might have been one of his major antihypertensives, and he may very well go back to that once this memory is gone. But I'm getting this answer that day because he had an emotionally charged memory from the day before. So sometimes it's important to kind of know what your respondents have been exposed to. What are the recent ads they've been exposed to? Maybe what's been out in the media lately, or what articles have been out recently, because that's going to affect their answers. And whoop. Okay, representative heuristic. And this is basically that people make decisions or judgments based on mental prototypes. This one kind of annoys me a little bit because I'm a little overweight myself. But anyway, so example, I'm in an airport and I see a nice older woman, and she's got short white hair and she reminds me of my grandmother, and all of a sudden I get warm, fuzzy feelings. I'm thinking, oh my God, this woman's so sweet. Maybe I'll sit next to her while I'm waiting for the plane, you know, and everything like that. She could be the crankiest old lady in the world, or the world's best pickpocket. But I've got this prototype that a short older woman with, you know, short hair is sweet and nice. So they did a study, and they on doctors' prescribing habits, and sort of a meta-analysis tying it back to sort of what the patients were. And what they found was doctors prescribe differently for overweight patients than they do for normal weight patients. An overweight patient, say with diabetes, is 10 times likelier to get an injectable, a once-a-week injectable, versus a daily oral. Why? Because the doctor has a prototype of thinking that this patient is not compliant. That's their mental judgment. Is that true? I don't know. I'm a pretty compliant patient. You know, I mean, I'm a nurse, so I've got my little pill boxes, I take everything. But, you know, studies have shown that we do this. So I think some of the best ways to kind of get around these things and understand these representative heuristics in your research are photo sorts. Because if I was to ever ask a doctor, do you prescribe differently for your overweight patients than you prescribe for your normal weight patients? Can you imagine? I'd probably get yelled out of the room. But by a photo sort, I might get at that, you know, just in how they describe the patient and such. So photo sorts are a great way to do that. So here's the thing that is why I would never say that I'm an expert. Currently, they think that there are over 900 identified heuristics. This could be 2 years of college trying to figure this out. And there are companies out there already that have algorithms for quantitative based on these 900 heuristics. But there are some, I'm going to go over some that I really think influence us and that we have to be, we have to understand. The big one that I really think is very important is framing. So framing is basically, in a nutshell, words have the power to change meaning. It's as simple as that. So on the left, this might be one that everybody's seen, but basically look at the difference in answers for how long was the movie versus how short was the movie. They've done that for the height of basketball players. They've done it in many different cases. The one on the right, people were shown a video of a car accident, and when they exited the room, they were asked, depending as they came in different ways, how fast was the car going when X? The only thing that changed was the verb. Smashed, collided, bumped, hit, contacted. And you can see the difference in the answers. Words have the power to change meaning. What does that mean for us as researchers? We have to be really careful how we write our questions and how we ask our questions. We have to be as neutral as possible and make sure that we're not framing how we're going to get that answer. We have to check our question order effect, because even the order of questions can affect the answer you're going to get. I try and check a guide twice, and then if I have the time, I usually will have somebody else read my guide, just to make sure I'm not using language that it could influence. Because I mean, how simple? I mean, how long was the movie? That seems like a pretty simple question, but see how different an answer you got from how short was the movie. So key, framing is a big heuristic. Priming. Priming just basically says that we can be primed to different behaviors based on words, sensations, smells, odors. We can be primed to behave differently. So this is one, and don't worry about, like I said, you can download the deck, but this is basically about some, I'm going to give you other examples there a little bit. This is sometimes geared to medical. But in a study in a college, they brought in 2 groups of students. And in one room, they exposed the students to adjectives about the elderly and the disabled. They did not tell them that it was elderly and disabled, but they read these lists of words. And in the control group, they were just given lists of words about normal things. And they videotaped the whole thing, and then afterwards they analyzed the videotape. Interesting thing that they found out was the group that had been exposed to the words about the elderly walked out of the room slower than how they walked in, and walked out of the room slower than the control group. And they repeated this a ton of times. They were primed. They were primed. Medical example, hand washing. It's critical, well, it's critical right now, it's flu season. But in a hospital, hospital-acquired infections can be the difference between life and death. And certainly in an ICU. There was a hospital system in Florida that had a horrible, their ICU had a horrible hand washing statistic. I don't know the name of the hospital system, but don't go there. But anyway, it was something like in the 30s. It was bad. Even though when you first entered the ICU, there was a hand washing station and big signs saying, please wash your hands. So they brought in a group to try and help fix this. And they did some control tests to see if it would improve. So in one of their ICUs, they did nothing. They just left it the way it was. The hand washing station was there, major signs saying, please wash your hands. And then in the other ICU, they spritzed a fresh citrus scent, was spritzed as people walked into the ICU. That's all that was done, just a citrus scent. Hand washing went up 40% on a scent. So you can see how priming can truly affect things. So here's the thing about priming that we need to understand. We can't get rid of it completely. It's all over. But we as researchers do need to make sure that our environment is neutral. Our questions are neutral. The clothing, I hate to say it, that we wear is neutral. You know, certain colors are very cultural to people. And so we need to make sure that we're not priming our respondents. Affect. And this just really it means that the emotional, that our emotions basically impact our decisions. And I think this is sort of some of these are no-brainers, but when you really start to realize that this is where we operate 95% of the time, I think you start to take it into, and you really start to bring it into research, it has an effect. So I think the biggest thing that I think about when I think about affect is communications research for stimuli research. Because so often it's very rational. We rate, we rank, we ask for the pros, we ask for the cons. And yet the truth of the matter is studies have shown that with any type of stimuli, we make emotional associations in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye. By the time you ask a question, they've already subconsciously made a decision about these things. So I think it's really important that what we need to do is really get at that primitive brain, those associations, before we get into the introspection and the ratings and the rankings. And you can do that a couple of different ways. So one of the ways that I suggest is to do cognitive interviewing as people are exposed to your stimuli or your communications. And if you don't know cognitive interviewing, it's just a think aloud technique. Basically, you're not probing at all, you're encouraging them to think aloud as they're exposed to it. So try and get those gut reactions first before you go into the introspection. The other thing that I've really found to be critical now is to record sort of body language. I've always used body language. I think a good moderator does. You know when your person goes back like this or comes like this, and sometimes you use it to your advantage. Hey doctor, you don't look like you're real happy about what I just presented to you. You're kind of giving me a nasty look or something. So I've used body language to my benefit, but what I've never done until behavioral economics is written down body language next to my notes. Now I do it, and I use it in my analysis, because that's truly the gut. That's the subconscious. So those are two techniques you can kind of do to make sure you get a hold of that gut affect, especially in your communications and stimuli work. Loss aversion. Anybody see Crazy Rich Asians?
Yeah.
Okay. First scene of Crazy Rich Asians, the actress, the main actress, she's an economics professor, and she's playing poker with a student, right? And she wins, and the student is all upset, and she stands up and announces to the class, you know, I played to win, you played not to lose. Loss aversion. I was like sitting in the movie theater going, oh, that's so behavioral science. I just love it. Anyway, so studies have shown that you're twice as miserable losing $100 as you are happy winning $100. And what's more, to overcome a loss, you have to have 2 times the gain. That's how much we don't like to lose. It's really, 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 really critical. So what does that mean for us, once again, as market researchers? What are we usually trying to help our clients do? Our clients want to sell a product. They want to sell a service. They want to change behavior, right? To really do that, we have to understand what it is our respondents are afraid of losing. So one of the biggest things that I realized in market research, once I started really studying this, is that there's a big hypothesis in pharmaceutical that the reason you can't change physicians' prescribing habits is just that habit. I would beg to differ. I think it's loss aversion. And I think if you drive your research hard enough, you'll find that it's not just the product that they're prescribing. Maybe it's the good feelings they get from 10 years of never having a side effect. What are they afraid of losing? Because only when you figure out what your respondents are afraid of losing can you help your clients drive behavior change. Hyperbolic discounting. I just like saying that word. And I hope most of you do not hyperbolic discount tonight, and I'll explain why. So hyperbolic discounting basically says that, okay, you're doing it again. There we go. We prioritize small rewards now over larger rewards later. So my joke about hyperbolic discounting is I hope that you don't drink so much to enjoy tonight forgetting the hangover tomorrow. That's hyperbolic discounting. You can see by this example that it's kind of sad to me as a nurse. Only 10% of people after bike pass make the necessary changes. But that's not only is hyperbolic discounting about small rewards now over large rewards later, but the discounting, the larger the time period, the more likely we are to discount it. So in other words, if you are a 30-year-old who's diagnosed with hypertension, that heart attack is years and years and years away. You're much more likely to discount that reward and do what you want to do now. Has major implications for compliance, if nothing else. But one of the things that I think is important about this heuristic, I don't always have, and I'd be interested to hear as I say these things, by the way, if anybody in the room can come up with ways to work, change your research for this, I'm all for it. The thing that I think with this one is you just have to discount some of the answers your people give you. Like if your person tells you they're completely compliant, 9 times out of 10 that's not the truth. Just based on heuristics, they're probably not compliant. So hyperbolic discounting, or if they're smoking, they're drinking. So I'm doing pharmaceutical examples, but let's face facts. Lifestyle. If you do anything in lifestyle, hyperbolic discounting comes into it. But I think the key is that you have to It's a heuristic that you need to know about because you need to take things that your respondents tell you with a grain of salt. Messenger. That, interestingly enough, we all do message testing. And, you know, it's an important part of our research if you do any types of communications. But studies have shown that 50% of how a message is accepted is the message, and 50% is the messenger. And we put so much emphasis on the message and not enough emphasis on the messenger. So, a couple of examples. In Zimbabwe, they did a get braids, not AIDS. So they were trying to increase the usage of female condoms to decrease the spread of HIV. They had done public service announcements, there were flyers, they had done everything they could, but it really wasn't moving the needle. So what they did was they trained hairdressers, because the women go to hairdressers in Zimbabwe. And they trained them on the female condoms, and they started spreading the message, and you can see they finally started moving that needle. Here in the United States, we did something very similar. I don't understand why they didn't roll this out completely, to tell you the truth. But if you've ever seen the movies Barbershop, you know, they're funny comedies. But they're also very reflective of a cultural norm for African American men. The barbershops are very kind of critical to them. It's where they meet socially. African American men also have higher rates of hypertension, and their hypertension is 10 times more severe. So they went to a couple of cities and they trained the barbers on hypertension and antihypertensives and going to the doctor and monitoring and everything. And statistically in those cities, the men started going to the doctor. They started to be compliant. They started to keep an eye on their blood pressure. Like I said, I'm not quite sure why that didn't completely get rolled out. It was just a social science test, and yet with such positive results, you would think that that would get rolled out. So I think for research, it comes down to two things. One, not just testing the message, but I do think we have to have an understanding of how messages are going to be rolled out. Because I think in research you need to figure out if, however our clients plan on rolling these messages out, is that the best way for them? Because they're not thinking this. They're just thinking about the message. They get very hung up on the message. And then secondly, the other thing that I guess I think about is that basically these studies show that we're more likely to take a message from someone who's in our own demographic and social norm. So we are the messenger too, in a way, when we do research, right? I mean, we're not driving a message, we're researching, but we're presenting data, we're trying to get people comfortable, we're trying to get something out of them. So I think the other thing that I take away from this is, are you looking at each of your respondent types correctly and dressing to the respondent types? I'm embarrassed to say when I first started doing market research, I wore suits all the time. I thought that was it. You know, I was switching from nursing over to business. I thought, oh my God, I've got to wear a suit. I don't anymore. If I'm doing Medicare patients, I might do jeans and a nice sweater. If I'm doing a thought leader or a KOL, I'm definitely going to be in a suit. No ifs, ands, or buts. If I'm doing nurses, I'm going to really downplay that. I don't even sometimes tell nurses I'm a nurse because I can either get a very positive reaction to that one or a very negative reaction to that one, and I don't like to play that card. But I do sort of change my demeanor, my clothes, how I present myself, depending on my respondent type, so that they can more easily accept what I'm going to be putting in front of them and asking them. Commitment. This is just basically if we make a public commitment, we're more likely to follow through, you know. So this can be used for compliance. They did this study was in vaccines, and basically they sent out reminders, which drove things up. Then they asked people to write down a date, and that drove up the rates even higher. And then they asked them to write a date and a time, and that drove up the rates even higher. But the idea of committing goes a long way with other things. Committing to quitting smoking, committing Weight Watchers, that's a big one. If I get up here and, well, I'm never going, I'm not going to see you guys for another year, so I can tell you I'm going on a diet, it won't matter. But if I announce that to my family, which unhappily I did last year because my daughter got engaged, what a mistake that was. Not because my daughter got engaged. But I never did lose the weight. At the end, I rationalized to myself that everyone was going to be watching my daughter, not me, so it really didn't matter. But if we publicly commit to something, we're more likely to do it. So that's just another one that I would love to figure out a way that a technique that would help me with this, but I think it's an important one that we have to keep in mind. Once again, because if we're doing things like health style changes and stuff like that, it might be important for us to kind of understand what went into kind of these decisions. What did they do? Did they not tell anybody that they were going to try quitting smoking? Did they tell the world? That may drive a difference in kind of their responses and what we get. Defaults. I love this one. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Richard Thaler. He's a big lover of defaults. He wrote the book Nudge, which I highly recommend. Great book. And Richard Thaler believes that we can drive change by being choice architects. He calls them choice architects. And what that basically means is setting up defaults to drive people to the behavior that we want them. It doesn't mean that you can't do what you want to do, but by setting up defaults, you're more likely to get things. So in the one thing I'm talking about, organ donation. In countries that have an opt-out, so in other words, the second you get your license, you're an organ donor, whether you like it or not. Now you have every right to get out of that, to opt out of that, but you have to opt out. Well, we're lazy. We don't like to think. We live in our primitive brain. Not many people opt out, and you can see the difference in a country that you need to opt out. Our rates are horrible in this country. We're an opt-in. So that's the difference. Drug formulary lists are probably the original default. Sure, you can get the brand name, but you're going to have to jump through a heck of a lot of hoops to get that name brand, The interesting thing about Nudge is that Nudge has become so popular, this idea of defaults has become so popular, there's actually a Nudge think tank in Washington. And these are people that do nothing but, wouldn't you love that job? Sit around and try and think of these defaults and setting up this architecture to drive people into better behaviors. And one of the things that they've come up with, and I know it's for sure because both my girls recently in the last couple of years got their first big girl jobs. Companies now you have to opt out of your 401k. So the second you get hired, you're in a 401k whether you like it or not. You need to opt out of it. And some companies have gone even further, and not only do you have to opt out of it, they have the yearly increase, and that's a double opt-out. And what they're finding is people like my children's age, young adults, are now saving for retirement, and they don't even know it. They really don't know it. That's a default that was set up. And that's some of the stuff that's coming out of think tanks, this choice architecture. But the truth of the matter is we need to help our clients be choice architects. Through research, we can help them define and design defaults to drive what they want. They want people to buy their product. They want to change behavior. Well, choice architecture is the way. And so some of this stuff is really cool. There's also a Nudge think tank in London. I don't know about what other countries, but those are the two that I know about. And that's what they do. They also do things like cafeterias. So they're designing school cafeterias where dessert is at the very back, right? Now, it doesn't mean you can't go get your chocolate cake. Because when I showed this slide to someone, they said, well, that's not right. How dare they play with us? And I'm like, well, not really. You can get the brand name drug. You can opt out of the organ donation. You can get your chocolate cake. You're going to have to think about it. You're going to have to act on it. You're going to have to move. And we don't like to. But nobody's saying you can't have it. Nobody's taking it away from you. So that's an interesting one that I love, and I love reading about the think tank in Washington. Peak end rule. So the peak end rule basically says that we judge things, not by everybody thinks that, an experience, whether it be patient journey, buying process, whatever kind of thing that you can think of, that it's an average of the highs and the lows. Not true. Behavioral science tells us it's an average of the peak, whether that be good or bad, pain or pleasure, and the end. And that's the average. So one of the best examples I can give is childbirth. We all remember the pain, absolutely, but it ends on a high if you had a normal healthy birth and a normal healthy child. And the combination of those two averages out to a pretty positive thing. Peak end rule. Bad breakup. Might have been a great relationship, but if it ended really badly, the high in that thing is more of a low. So what's the implication for us as researchers? What I just said. I do a lot of patient journey work. But I'm sure that in the room you do journey work in whatever it is, or you do buying process in whatever it is. And you need to remember the peak end rule, and not that it's an average of the experience throughout, because it's not. That's not what we remember. Behavioral science is coming into everything. Hospitals are very competitive these days, trying to get patients in. And hospitals have really bought into this idea, and they're doing a lot of aftercare now, like calling up patients, sending nurses to them and everything like that. And yeah, it's a nice thing, but don't think it's altruistic. They've completely bought into the cookie jar here. They know that if they end the experience on a really positive note, you're more likely to come back to their hospital. And that's why they're doing it. Okay. All right. Decoy effect. Marketers have been using this for a long time. I don't know if they understood that it was, behavioral science, but they certainly have been using it for a long time. Go in to buy toothpaste or anything. You're just overwhelmed with the amount of brands. I think they've gone beyond decoy effect to just confusion now. But basically what it means is that, and marketers, like I said, are pros at it, if they want to be selling the €350 bottle of Tylenol, they're likely to come out with a $5 model, because that's going to drive you right to the $350. That's what it's decoy. It's purely a decoy. They usually don't even manufacture that much. So true story. William Sonoma was one of the first people to come out for bread machine. How many people had a bread machine? I do somewhere. I think I used it once. Anyway, it was about $200, and no one was buying it. So they went out to a firm and they said, what can we do to move these? We're stuck with like hundreds of thousands of these bread machines. What do we do? And they were kind of shocked that they did it. The firm came back and said, we want you to make a $450 bread machine. And they were like, they said, don't make a ton of them, but make a $450 bread machine, put it right next to the $200 bread machine in Williams-Sonoma. They did it, and $200 bread machines started selling like sliced bread. Yeah. Anyway, so as researchers, what does that mean? Maybe it's worth a trip to the store if you're doing something in retail. or an OTC or something like that to kind of see what, I mean, so I'm just going to pull one of the toothpaste. I don't do toothpaste, but fine. So what kind of toothpaste do you like? And they may tell you a brand, but is that truly what they prefer in a toothpaste, or were they driven to that purchase from a decoy effect? So a little bit of homework sometimes can really help add to your analysis. Social norms, and that we just seek to be part of our culture, right? We want to go with what it is. We're strongly influenced by what other people do. The unwritten rules on how to behave. This is another one where homework can be really, really, really helpful. So one of the things we've started doing at Kantar is something called cultural narrative. And it's not social media listening. It's not, that's kind of expensive. But it's just kind of go out. You can do it as desk research. Just go out and sort of see what's being said about your therapeutic area, what you're selling. And I'm not talking like Facebook or blogs. That's social media listening. Maybe media, maybe what's in magazines, maybe what's in newspapers. Kind of get a feel for what's happening. So this is one that we did for IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. We were doing a study in irritable bowel, and we did a cultural narrative. It was a global study, and we were trying to find the hidden influencers. What's those social messages that's being said to our respondents? What's happening out there? We did some social media listening too, but if you ask me, this was almost more telling. Look at how we are just, I don't know if you say we're marginalizing IBS. I mean, hello, New York Times, let the mind help tame an irritable bowel. I love China. A cold drink and a walk in an air-conditioned room. UK, stress and TV dinners. I love that. And then lastly, Germany, 40% of diagnosis false. Now, if you are a sufferer of irritable bowel syndrome, first of all, I feel really sorry for you, and I hope your medicine works. But it's not a fun condition. It's not. It's painful, and it's embarrassing, and it's so many things. And this truly is marginalizing this. This was just a little bit of desk research, right? But we were able to dig deeper, put in better probes after seeing something like this. And what we really found, and this really, is that it's such a hidden condition. They're almost driven into hiding their condition. They tell people that they have, gluten intolerances and their lactose intolerance, anything. But part of it is that they're being driven by these social norms, that it's not an acceptable thing. It's in their head. They ate too many TV dinners last night. I didn't even know they still made TV dinners. But anyway, cultural narratives, a really good thing to add to your research. And also a good thing, it's good for you to add it beforehand, certainly, because will help you with your probes. But it's even better afterwards. You can add this into your results. Clients love it. Ego. I hate this picture, only because my oldest daughter smokes, and I'm a nurse, and it still kills me. But anyway, ego basically says that if it's a good thing, we're likely to take credit. If it's a bad thing, we're likely to blame somebody else or the situation that we're in. But why do we need to take ego into consideration? Basically because we tend to, and studies have shown this, we tend to overestimate good things and good outcomes, and we tend to underestimate bad outcomes. And that's just behavioral science. Kind of goes, once again, I think that the one thing that I've learned through all of this is that you really have to go deeper than the answers your respondents are giving you. because there's just too many things. They're giving you truthful answers. There's no offense or buts. But if you, or at least they think they are, but the truth of the matter is they're being influenced by all of these things. Their judgments on prevalence, their ego effect, all these things are driving their answers. And you just have to take that into effect in your analysis. So what can we, I'll stop here. Any questions before I go on? Some of this I've kind of gone on, I've talked about, but I'll just, so what can we do to do research? And first of all, I would say we're doing a bang-up job, especially QRCAers, we're doing a bang-up job because projectives are one of the best ways of getting a good behavioral science technique. Projective exercises are wonderful. And if there's anyone besides the QRCA that hasn't taught me over the years how to use, projective exercises. So I'm not saying that we're doing research bad, and I have to tell this to my clients all the time if I talk about this. We've been doing research fine. We can do it better. We can go deeper. We can have more moments of those wonderful nuggets that just make your day and say, I know I'm on my 10th interview, but darn, that was a good interview. I uncovered such findings, and you end on a high. You can have more of that. Your research can get better. So words have the power to change. Some of this is just repetitive. Make sure you're using clean, neutral language. Be aware of your question order effect. Consider a narrative style of interviewing. So we're trying to do that a lot more. In other words, we did it in that IBS study. So it's really easy moderating, by the way, because basically you kind of just sit back and let them talk. And you want to keep them some guardrails around them, but you're basically letting them drive the narrative with some guardrails. It's a lot like cognitive, it's a lot think aloud, and you're going to get a lot more richness when you can do that. Often hard to convince clients of that because clients go into research with the kitchen sink wanting to know a lot of stuff. But my recommendation about kind of starting to get this into your research, the first time I did this with a communications thing, I talked to the client and I remember I told him all about this, and he's like sitting there nodding, and you could see him lighting up and everything like that, and I thought, oh, I won. I'm going to be able to get do this project the right way, man. We're going to be able to do narrative interviewing, get gut feel and everything like that. Get to the end, and he goes, but we're going to get all of our ratings and rankings. I was like, okay, all right, so, roll back your expectations a little, Col. But I threw a few things in, just a couple of things, and when I was able to demonstrate to him the benefit of putting in some of these techniques to get more at the gut and show him the benefit of it, I think the next time I do a project for him, he'll let me go a little further. You know what I mean? So I think we're going to have to we're not going to be able to flip this in a day, get clients to walk away from stuff that they want. But every time you can get a little bit further, show them this, it's great. Don't underestimate emotions and gut feel. I was watching a moderator, and I kind of thought I was going to die in the back room. She was doing message testing, and she was leaving these messages in front of these respondents. It felt like 10 minutes each message. I'm sure it wasn't, but it sure felt like it. And I thought, what are you getting out of this? In reality, they're never going to spend 10 minutes reading a message in a magazine. You need to get the reaction to this message, and I kind of cringed, but, Anyway, so really limit the introspection. More gut feel. That's all I can say. Is there a role for physiological measures? Bob would love this, but yes, I'm going to say, eye tracking and stuff like that fits right into behavioral science. Do you need to replicate emotional states? So this is one thing that I have started doing, and clients usually will buy into this. I can't get doctors to do visualization, but I can get patients to do visualization. So I will lead them through a visualization exercise sometimes. For instance, COPD patients, and have them close their eyes and describe the worst day that they've had with COPD at the beginning of the interview. And then boom, I head right into the interview. I've got them in a really emotional state at that point. I've got them making their judgments and giving me questions, answers to my questions in a completely different way. What I have been able to do with doctors, and actually these are the two techniques that I used with this client to show him that this could work, is photo sorts. So I might, COPD again, do a photo sort with a physician and say, pick a photo for, your worst COPD patient, and really describe in detail to me why you picked that. I'm getting them into the same emotional state. I wish I could do visualization, but there's just so far. You can push doctors somewhat, but you can't push them completely. But you can get them there, and so that's a good thing. I've talked about this. Take notes of body language and add them into your analysis. Really try doing it. You're really going to be amazed. Everyone in this room is a good moderator. I know you're using body language already, but are you putting it into your analysis? Are you giving it just as much weight as the responses you're getting? Remember, people are poor predictors of their own behavior. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. And if it's truly a behavioral study, then I'm going to suggest ethnography, because the truth of the matter is you get wrong answers on prevalence, you get wrong predictions, just too many things coming in there, ego and everything else that I've talked about. Make sure that we call it the 3 pillars. So we believe when we do research with respondent, we want to get at the individual, their personal attitudes, their beliefs, their behaviors and everything, but we also want to get at the social. We need to understand the cultural norms that they're living within with these things like the cultural narrative and who's influencing them, who do they influence. I think a lot of times our research is very individual based. People want to know what but it's not. We don't live in a vacuum. We live in, in social norms, in cultures. Is there a need for social media listening? Blogs, or like I said, cultural narrative. I can't say enough about cultural narrative, only because, social media listening is a great thing, and we suggest it to our clients. It's expensive, and most of the time they don't bite. That's just the truth. They don't bite. Cultural narratives, pretty easy. You can do it. It's desk research, and it really adds to your research. Use techniques that get at both System 1 and System 2. Mind maps, great. System 1, System 2, gets at both. Blob trees, and if you don't know what a blob tree is, ask afterwards, comes out of academia. Photo sorts, I've talked about those a ton. I can't say enough about photo sorts. I think they're wonderful. Rapid fire questioning. As when you can fit in a little bit of rapid fire questioning, you're going to be really surprised at the answers you get. Don't give them too much time to give you a response. Narrative interviewing, and I've mentioned it before, cognitive interviewing. Limit ratings, rankings, and post-rationalization. I wish. In my dreams. Anyway, but I think we're going to get there. I just, we have to show the benefit of these other things. That's the key. Push them a little bit, push them a little bit more. Here's the funny thing about that study with this client that I've got to say, is that I actually wasn't the moderator, but I sold him on the behavioral economics, and I went to the research to observe. And I was sitting in the back room, and I was listening to them describe their day with COPD or their photo sorts. And I looked at the list of messages based on what I heard them say about their life, and 9 times out of 10 I picked the message that they picked. And I think when the client started realizing that, how closely the two tied together, that was when he finally was like, okay, this works. Maybe I don't need all these ratings and rankings. I need them to be more in the moment when they're judging these messages. Did I go? I'm going wrong. Okay, here we go. All right. When you analyze, we've talked about this, but be careful when respondents make predictions. I'm going to tell you 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be right. Don't take them at face value. Split out your gut level responses, your body language, and give weight to when you're forming your conclusions. Analyze them separately if you can. If you've got enough body language, rapid fire questioning, gut responses, and you've got your rational side, analyze them separately and then compare them and see what you find. And then I would personally give more weight to the gut, but that may be something that you have to inch your way into. Understand tone and context of any stimuli. Remember, stimuli is a primer. So it's not just, the colors they're using, the tone they're using. Make sure that you really have an understanding of the stimuli you're testing, because that is a priming in a way. And record your nonverbal cues. I've talked about that. Listen for language patterns and match that to any stimulus. So really make sure you understand your stimulus, and then how well does that match how the respondents are speaking about themselves and their world, or their product, or their medicine, or their therapeutic area. And bring that into your analysis too. Look for other heuristics that could be influencing behavior. We've talked about primes. I can't talk enough about them. And once you really understand priming, you will start to look at yourself, the room, your stimulus in a whole different way, and really start to get a sense of how it can influence people. And I think it goes without saying. Remember, insight from research is far more than what respondents say. In fact, I would say that we, as the experts, it's what they're not saying that's key. All right, any questions? Yeah.
Could you just talk a little bit about narrative and cognitive interviewing techniques? Did everyone hear that, or should I get over here? All right. Just was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the narrative and cognitive interviewing techniques. So
Okay.
was that like storytelling with prompts? Or?
No, so cognitive interviewing is very close to narrative. It's literally called the think aloud technique. And so it's crazy because you don't realize how much you're going to get out of it. I know when I first started doing cognitive interviewing, I was like, it's crazy. But it's amazing what you get out of it. So one way that we're doing, the best way to do this is, I'll explain how I do it in concept testing. So say I've got concept testing. We do what's called a gallery test. So we might put the concepts around the room. And then we will, outside the room, give the physician or the patient some directions. And basically we'll just ask them, when you go into that room, I want you to just start thinking aloud. Don't, just think aloud. Sometimes I'll give them a little example first. I'll say, okay, who's bigger, Apple or Google? Think aloud to kind of get them going, because we're not used to thinking aloud about our decisions, right? So I'll do that, and you'll go into the room, and you'll stay with the respondent as you're going into the room. And the whole time you're saying, tell me what you're thinking, tell me what you're thinking, tell me what you're thinking. And you're getting basically this complete think aloud, which is all gut level, before you're going into your more rational space. Narrative is letting the respondent start at their own place and just truly tell you their story. So it is storytelling in a way, but you're not getting in their way. You're letting them be very narrative about their own story. And just putting up guardrails so that they don't go too far off the beaten path.
we're actually at time.
I know, we are, I'm sorry.
So I want to encourage any of you who have any more questions for Colleen to come up and speak with her afterwards. They have to set up this room for roundtables, I believe, or they're right next door. And so we've got about 5 minutes, I think. You can run up to the marketplace and then the roundtable.
I will be at the thing on tomorrow.
Oh, yes, and Colleen will be at the questioning event on Friday if you want to ask her some more questions too. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you. Oh, thanks.